What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to go over the 3 different levels of sanding. At least this is what I have coined them to be. There might be other ones out there, but these are the most important that I think. And that is going to be a scuff sand, a smooth sand, and a flat sand. Most of the time, whenever it comes to finishing, most people confuse these and they think that they've done a flat sand. In reality, they only did a scuff sand, and it shows through their finish coating. So we're going to show kind of how to do each one of them, and then like the characteristics that you use whenever you want to do a flat, a smooth, and a scuff sand. So let's get started. First things first, as you see on this panel here, I have a scuff sand here, I have a smooth sand here, and I have a flat sand. Now, the things I want you to notice right out of the gate is that over here is the most dull looking finish. And the reason for that is because the entire surface has been sanded flat. That is why you don't see some sheen still showing through. This is also, as you can tell, a gloss black door. We did this so that you could see some of the light reflection that's going on here. The way we get a scuff sand is we use a foam pad and we just hit the area just lightly. Essentially all you're doing is dulling or deglossing the surface a little bit. Depending on different finishers, this wouldn't technically be scuff sanded for them yet. It would continue to go until it was completely deglossed, which, you know, there's definitely a time and a place for that, but most of the time a scuff sand is just to hit the whole surface, rough it up a little bit. We're not trying to get out a ton of imperfections. Smooth sand, same thing, except we're going to use a flat pad here, and then we're going to use a foam pad over top of it. And then the flat sand, we're actually going to sand the entire thing perfectly flat, and then we'll go over it with a foam pad afterwards, just to be sure that we, you know, got all of the corners and whatnot really well. I'm going to go grab another one of these panels and we're going to get started. Okay, so we have a panel now. Again, this is a black gloss. We're doing this so we can see all of the imperfections here. The 2 levels of sanding you can do by hand is going to essentially be a scuff and a smooth sand. To do a flat sand, it's almost always going to need a orbital or some sort of electric sander. You can do flat sanding by hand. It definitely takes a lot out of you though. So all we're going to do is we're just going to take something, a fine grit, whatever it is, and then all we do is literally you're just going to take and degloss the surface. Okay, that really is the extent of a scuff sand. There's still, as you notice, there is still going to be a reflection of light because it's not all completely dull, but everywhere over here, we'll go ahead and do it all the way over. So now I want you to notice here, this scuff sand, there are still highs and lows on this door or this panel that it didn't get rid of, okay? There's still this high spot here, 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 and then there's a bunch of low spots. So there's a couple lows here. There is a low over here on this door that this scuff sand didn't get. And remember, the scuff sand we only do before like prime coats, or if we're not flat sanding or smooth sanding, we just do it just to make sure that coatings can adhere to each other. So we're not really doing any surface imperfection like removal. Whenever we sand, we could, you know, try and sand around these circles a little bit more, but as you'll notice, they're still there. Okay, if you're trying to get rid of these, a scuff sand is not the way to go. A scuff sand is what we do when we want to prep a surface to spray over top of it or brush or roll, however you're applying your next coating. The next one is going to be a smooth sand, and we're gonna go ahead and bust out the sander for that because it's a little bit easier. Aha! We're gonna sand. We have a ton of Festool and surf prep sanders and whatnot. I actually will use a flat pad for this just because it's a little easier to see. We're gonna get 320 here. We're gonna go around, and the thing is like some of these imperfections that you saw, like this one here, would still technically kind of be considered a smooth sand. Even whenever we go over it, there's an indentation there that the smooth sand is not going to get out, okay? The smooth sand, all we're really looking to do is make sure that the entire door or the whole surface is smooth when we drag our hands across it. Okay, so that was sanded with 320. If we look closely on this, there is still a lot of areas that have gloss to them. You can still see light reflection, a pretty decent amount across this door. But if you were to take your hand and drag it across it, everywhere on this door is smooth to the touch. So that would be a smooth sand. If you wanted to go a step above that, you could throw a foam pad on your sander. Just to be, you know, double sure. And then again, we're gonna wipe it down, super smooth. So to the hand, this door, super smooth. There's nothing that you can notice really, except for maybe this one where there's a slight indentation. You have to really look for that one. It's pretty severe, but if you weren't really trying to look for it, you wouldn't necessarily find it. Most of the times in a smooth sand, this wouldn't be fixed because this would require filling, and that would be kind of in the flat sand bracket. What we're gonna do is we're gonna throw on the orbital, the round sander. Found him. Now, this is where things get out of pocket fast. So whenever we're doing a flat sand, it definitely requires a lot more finesse. There's a little bit more attention to detail. That scuff and that smooth sand, like I said, they're great. The smooth sand is like if you're trying to go for a finish, but you're not super concerned about the entire surface being perfectly flat. And a lot of times finishes on kitchens are just smooth sanded. Like even from factories, most of the time they're just smooth sanded. They're not flat sanded because the easiest way to tell is if you look at a panel and you can see wood grain showing through, that's a smooth sand. That's not a perfectly flat sand. Flat sands are levels above. It takes a ton of time and effort and then also more coating to get something to a flat sand. Definitely looks better, you know, especially for a paint job. It definitely makes everything look like a sheet of glass, which looks great, but you don't see it very often. So we're gonna show you really quickly here. Now what we're looking for is up close on this panel, on this door, there's still some things that are showing through the finish that we're going to remove when we flat sand it, okay? So if you look closely here, down here, there's a little indentation. You can't even feel it with your hand. There's a little bit of a water spot right here that you can't feel. There's these couple areas where it was high that you can't feel, maybe here. You can't really feel these, but you can see them just a tad. Those are gonna be the things that we sand out when we flat sand this. So on this sander, we have it set to 320 grit. You can do this with 500 grit, depends on what top coat you're doing, so what sheen you're going to be spraying over it with. Like always, we're gonna start with our sander down low. We don't wanna take a ton of material right off the gate. All right, I'm gonna bump it up now. Now, I've only sanded half of it. The reason I did this, I want to show something really important here. One, it all reflects light almost exactly the same now. You can see the little bit of like the swirling from the sander itself, which we'll get out whenever we go over it with the foam. But this low spot right here, still kind of hard to see. If you're really looking for it, obviously you would notice it right out of the gate. This low spot, we're gonna actually fill, because if we were to try and sand this area down, we would create a divot in the door. And then whenever you throw your top coat over top of it, you would see that in the finish. So this actually needs to be brought up to the height of the rest of this door rather than us bringing down this area, or worse yet, trying to bring down the entire door to the low spot of that divot. We don't want to do that. We always run into risks of burning through somewhere. This is a slab door, so it's a little bit easier, but especially in like shakers or raised panels, we're just going to bring this up to the height of this, and we'll do that with putty or whatever we're kind of calling for with that process. So we'll keep sanding. Now, something to note here. On this door in particular, there is technically a low spot because I sanded here back and forth right in the middle of this door. So if you were to look at this like at a almost microscopic level, you would see the door kind of come in like this on this finish coating here. Fortunately, it's so negligible that you probably won't see that in your finish coating as long as you're flat sanding with your sander. So this again comes back to sanding flat. It's not just talking about the surface being flat, it's talking about your sander being flat and that you never tilt your sander, okay? As soon as you tilt your sander, you're gonna get uneven pressure. That uneven pressure is gonna dig a divot down, and that will show up in your finish coatings. If you're spraying or you're rolling a matte finish, you're fine. But if you're doing satin or semi-gloss or high gloss and you're doing a high gloss black or something, that will show up 10 times out of 10. So that's a flat sand. One thing I would do after that point, just to make sure, because sometimes when you flat sand, if the coating wasn't completely cured beforehand, you'll get little like basically pieces of the paint that like gum up and they want to stay on the finish. And so going over it with a foam pad, a good clean foam pad to knock those down, just to make sure not only is everything flat, but everything is perfectly smooth and there's no imperfections on this door, then it would be ready for, normally flat sands are done right before we go to top coat. So we're not trying to do flat sands in between each coat of primer or, you know, between substrate to primer. This is reserved kind of once you have a lot of, you know, dry mills, a lot of paint built up that you can then sand flat. If you try and do it in between each coat, most of the time you'll continuously keep burning through your layers. And honestly, that sucks for lots of reasons. One, if you have a new door, let's say it's a new wood door, it comes to your shop and then you go, okay, here's 3 wet mills or 4 wet mills of, let's say, a high build primer. And then you come back and maybe there's a rough spot here. You then take and try and sand that perfectly flat and you burn back to bare wood. Well, guess what? Now you're back to bare wood. Everywhere else has more material. So then you have to respray it again just for that one spot. And then you have to try and sand it again. And then sometimes if it's really bad, you have to sand it again, right? And then you go, well, now there's no extra material for me to sand through. You keep burning through back to bare wood. Now you put on another coat of primer. The entire door now has a 3rd coat of primer just for this one spot because you kept trying to flat sand the entire surface between each layer. So sometimes that is required, but most of the time, like a smooth sand between primers is going to be the way to go. Because again, we just want to get rid of stuff that's in the finish, scuff it for the next coat, not necessarily try and sand it flat every single coat. Again, depending on the level you're working at. So this one here looks pretty solid. I'm gonna take this guy and hit it one more time. Another thing you can do when you're sanding your doors is if you know the vertical direction of the door, like let's say this is a drawer here and I know that it's going on like this, I most of the time will sand vertically with this foam pad. You can turn it sideways as well, but I would sand vertically. That way the light shines down it as opposed to sanding this way, just in case there's an imperfection, there's something going on with the sandpaper and it leaves, let's say, a squiggly from the sandpaper, then that light shining on it would have this line down it. It's much better to have those lines running vertically than to be running horizontally in a finished kitchen. There you have it. That is the 3 different levels of sanding. So let's recap. Scuff sand, first level of sanding. It's the least amount of material being taken away. All it's there for is to prep a surface beneath it so you can throw primer or a top coat on top of it. A smooth sand is going to be a step above the scuff sand because not only are we making sure that we have high adhesion between coats, but we're now wanting it to be smooth to our hand, right? And then that flat sand is going to be a level. It's going to be the top of the line. It's going to be normally what you do before your top coat, where you want the surface to be perfectly flat. There's no highs or lows. Everything, whenever it all dries, is going to come down to the exact same level. And this is what's going to give you that glass-like feel and look to it. By far, flat sand is my favorite whenever we do kitchens or whatever spraying, but sometimes different levels require different things. And if we're on a time crunch and we don't want to do flat sands, we'll do smooth sands. Let me get one more door and I'm going to demonstrate this one more time. So let's go over it again. New panel. This is what a scuff sand would look like. Honestly, it doesn't look like that much sanding, but if you're doing an entire kitchen on both sides between 2 or 3 coats, that's a lot of sanding. Honestly, it's really smooth even off of that right there. Just that right there. I have to really try and feel for things, and I really don't feel much. But that next step would be, okay, time for a smooth sand. We're gonna take whichever sander, throw this guy on here. Big thing about the smooth sand is the focus on both of these is to make sure we don't burn through coatings. All we're looking for is to knock down any of those high spots. That's why we sand it with a flat sandpaper pad instead of just doing it with a foam pad. Let's look at this up close. All right, something really important here is whenever we're doing our flat sand, you're going to need downlight. You're gonna need something to be able to see the imperfections that you're trying to sand down to. Again, like I said earlier, if they're really far down, you're gonna wanna just fill them and bring them up to the rest of the finish. But if it's, let's say, a high spot, you're gonna need that light to be able to see when you've brought that high spot down exactly to where the rest of the door is. So we've got our 320, we've got our light here. We're gonna kick the up lights off so we can see the surface better. Something else to notice here is even after I sand it like that, it just has a little bit more of a hazy look and feel to it because everything is exactly the same height and sanded nice and flat. Now you'll notice here, you can't feel it, but on this panel, there's 2, 3 low spots. Maybe where the MDF was milled or whatever, but like I would throw another coat of primer on this and then sand it flat once again to try and get those out. If it was a matte finish, you wouldn't have to be as concerned about it, but definitely in a semi-gloss or a gloss, you would see these imperfections. Go ahead and keep going. Big thing about flat sanding is that even in your bad spots, they should only get as much sanding as the rest of the door does. If you have an area that needs more sanding than that, you probably should just fill it to bring it up, because if you continuously put a ton of time right here, the likelihood that you get a divot here goes exponentially up each pass. I sanded this entire door essentially down to the same height. If I wanted to be super sure, I could take a block and hand sand it. We're looking really good. I actually was able to take and essentially get out those couple scratches as well. Yeah, I'm actually having a difficult time trying to find them. I think we did our job well. Yeah, so that's a flat sand I would take now. And then, so I don't know if you noticed, but whenever I was sanding, there was a couple times where you saw some swirls. And that was because a little piece of paint got stuck on the front of the sandpaper, and it basically kind of gums up the surface. So that's why we would then go over it with a fine pad. That's pretty good looking. Now, I don't know, it probably is hard to see, but there's so much dust collecting back on this door already. So much. And also just like falls off your hands. That's one of the big things. That's why we use like silk coveralls and stuff, because when you're working around it, especially if this was going to top coat, I just completely vacuumed this door down. There's already so much junk that's collected on this space in here. And there you have it. That is the 3 different levels of sanding that we use in different levels for our finishing. Like I said, they're different purposes. Scuff sands, you're getting it ready before a coat goes on. Smooth sand, you're smoothing up the surface, also scuffing it. And then a flat sand is you're also smoothing it, you're also scuffing it, but you're also sanding it perfectly flat, at least as best you can, to then throw another coat on top of it. Normally that flat sand is going to be done right before that top coat. Sometimes you have to do 2 flat sands, especially in areas where you have to sand and you have, like if this was a raised panel and you had little areas that you had to get inside with like a triangle sander or something, way more difficult to pull off flat sanding there. That would be the different levels and how to do the 3 different levels. Thank you guys for watching. We will see you in the next one.